often we think about a very limited resource of being dead trees. And if you have dead trees, it's one thing, but to have big dead trees mean you had to have big live trees. And that's what pileated woodpeckers especially need.
Hey, I'm Michael Yadrick, the host of Tree Hugger Podcast, and this is the show about the science, practice, and humans of ecological restoration. I'm back, kind of. I'm trying. So much has been going on. I have some news, though. I now have a website for the podcast. It makes the show a little more visible. At the site, one can find all the episodes with some bonus content like photos and videos of the guests. You can find links to things we discuss. Also, there's basic information about me, the values and themes I put forward, shows I am working on for the future, and even highlights of restoration-related news. It was some work to put together, but it was worth it. Yep, we can be found at treehuggerpod.com. Also, after a 2+ year hiatus from Facebook, I added a Tree Hugger page there. Please check me out there if that's your social media of choice. Also, there is now a YouTube channel that I will populate from time to time with video. You know, we've mostly been audio, but right now there is one video from the Climate Change Adaptation channel of Simpatico Studios. The great Doug Parsons from America Adapts interviewed me back in the spring about urban forest restoration, my specialty. And I try to talk a good game about how the restoration of urban forest patches is important to an equitable climate transition as more and more people are born or become urban. Then, I want to let you know I added the podcast to a few new destinations. Amazon Music /Audible, Deezer, iHeartRadio, and Ghana, which I hear is the biggest pod platform in India. Welcome if you're listening from one of those podcast portals. I feel like I need to explain the couple-month absence of an episode. The Tree Hugger Pod website was one thing. I am also working on a strategic plan for the Tacoma Tree Foundation with my tree buddies on the board. You might recall an episode a while back with Sarah Lowe, the executive director of that organization. I was also busy with Northwest Chapter board stuff for the Society for Ecological Restoration. We ended up canceling the February 2021 conference in Eugene and are currently brainstorming about making some virtual magic happen. Stay tuned. Anyway, it's been sunny summer weather here, so I'm spending more time outside away from the computer. My self-care checklist is in high gear right now. Am I trying to do too much? Am I sleeping? Am I mindful about my eating while teleworking? Maybe reading and taking in too much info overload, taking time to space out and taking breaks when need be, socialization and taking time to visit with friends has been weird during the pandemic, as most of you know. Time for exercise and recovery is important. This may resonate with you all, and I hope this episode is contributing in some way to your own self-care. So let's get back to talking about restoration stuff. This episode may change the way you think about the suburbs, if you even think about the suburbs. For a while now, I knew I wanted to do an episode on wildlife and the importance animals have in the recovery of ecosystems. Well, this episode is about my favorite feathered friend. I'm scheming on other interviews to highlight cool projects out there. My guest on this episode is John Marzluff, who is a James W. Ridgeway Professor of Wildlife Science at the University of Washington. His graduate and postdoctoral research focused on the social behavior and ecology of jays and ravens. He continues this theme through his current research that focuses on the interactions of ravens and wolves in Yellowstone. Dr. Marzluff has mentored over 40 graduate students and authored over 140 scientific papers on various aspects of bird behavior and wildlife management. I will mention a couple former graduate and doctoral students here, such as Jorge Tomasevic and Tina Bluitt, who worked to investigate the object of our discussion today, the pileated woodpecker. Now, the pileated woodpecker is generally known as the quintessential forest species. It is iconic with its red crest and charismatic activities plugging away at standing dead trees. They're such an important part of the forest ecosystem. Woodpeckers are characterized as ecosystem engineers. What I like best about them is that they facilitate diversity. The trees they excavate via their pecking creates homes for secondary use by cavity-dependent species. These could be other birds or small mammals who may not have the ability to create their own niches in the community. This is so beautiful because this action can accelerate the patchy mosaic of forest succession by providing habitat for seed and spore dispersing small mammals, insectivorous birds, and small predators. This is key to jumpstarting the ecological processes and functions. We can't restore forests without them, in my opinion. At this time in our lives during the mid-year 2020, I would love to extend this metaphor to our human communities. We all need agents that facilitate diversity. As we love diversity in our forests, we want to cultivate diversity in our neighborhoods. We cannot do it without you. Of course, there has been at least a century and a half of modification to our forests. Urban areas have expanded and densified. What people don't know is that woodpeckers in general, but pileated specifically, are highly adaptable. They survive in forested patches of natural areas that are co-created from remnant old forests. Cultural practices of indigenous ancestors, spontaneously regenerating vegetation, and our intentional management and stewardship. While there has been quite a bit of research about the forest structure and habitat that woodpeckers require, for those interested in restoration of urban ecosystems, there hasn't been much information available on suburban woodpecker reproduction, roosting, and survivorship, until now. Professor Marzluff is uniquely situated to speak about this topic. He has written 5 books and edited several others. His Welcome to Suburbia in 2014 discovers that moderately settled lands host a splendid array of biological diversity and suggests ways in which people can steward these riches to benefit birds and themselves. His most recent In Search of Meadowlarks, published this year in 2020, connects our agriculture and diets to the conversation of birds and other wildlife. In early summer, he invited me to his home in the suburbs north of Seattle. He was a gracious host. The episode is partially us sitting down to chat on his patio, and the back half is tidbits of recording of us walking and talking through his suburban restoration and home. We chat specifically about birds he encounters, lots of native plants, and strategies that we all can take to conserve habitat for birds and restore urban ecosystems for a future that has birds in it. I will always look back on this field trip with fond memories. Enjoy this episode with Dr. John Marzluff. I've been out in the field. I've been trying to record some bird sounds.
Well, so we can walk around and
early.
See what we can get.
Yeah, so thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
That's the home-ish. So welcome to Tree Hugger Podcast. I'm here with John Marzluff, professor at the University of Washington, and we're here to talk about the life of the pileated woodpecker. I feel like it's time right now. And I do have some affinity for them.
How's that?
I just think, I'm really into urban restoration and then forests as well. I don't think this is a novel idea that I came up with. I think if we preserve forests or we build habitat like with pileated woodpeckers in mind, we're probably doing the right thing, or probably benefiting a lot of other creatures as well. And sometimes ecological restoration projects, either they have the implicit goal, very explicit goal of enhancing habitat for birds, or otherwise it's always some side benefit that comes along with it. So that's the reason why I reached out to you to talk about birds, because it's often, I think, we don't really think it through. We really aren't super knowledgeable about all the species that we're building habitat for. So,
well, pileateds are a bit of an umbrella for other species. They have big habitat requirements, large areas, and especially large trees. So that can be great. If you're shooting for pileateds, you're going to get probably most of the other woodpeckers as well. I think my yard attests to that.
Okay.
I did some things with pileateds in mine, and I have flickers, hairy woodpeckers, sapsuckers, and lots of the smaller cavity nesters. So I don't have pileateds breeding yet, but certainly they're here and they forage. So yeah, I think it's a good target.
Great.
Sure.
We're out in Snohomish, Washington, out in north of Seattle. I don't know if you call this the suburbs. We're exurbs. Yeah, on the fringes of Seattle. I don't know. I drove about 30 minutes away or so, and there's a lot of nice looking, beautiful forest around us. We're sitting in John's backyard, and so it's nice organic. I don't know. I assume people can hear the birds. Can you describe your passion for birds and how your research and focus for the work has changed over time?
Sure. I mean, I've been interested in wildlife in general since I was a small kid, fishing and hunting, and then had a really great high school teacher that got me focused more on academic research or research with a purpose as opposed to just enjoying the natural resources that are out there. We'd collect snakes and mammals and go and count herons at colonies and all kinds of things. This was in eastern Kansas. So he got me fixated on doing actual research and getting out in the field to collect things and see new things. And that just kind of stuck with me. I was turned on to birds more in college by a professor there. And then all my graduate work has involved birds. And most of my research, professional research, has involved birds. I started with social behavior and the behavior of jays and ravens back in Arizona and in Maine, and then studied raptors and their responses to military training in Idaho before coming to Washington. And here in Washington, again, I started with very much a conservation focus, but also animal behavior is a passion, and I'm interested in that. And so the conservation focus was on protecting habitat quality for marble murrelets. They nest on our coast in big trees, and the only thing they do on land is breed. So we were concerned about the nest predators, which included the crows and ravens and jays that I had studied a bit before, and that kind of led into more of an interest and passion in those birds in particular, especially crows and ravens, how they intersect with people, how we come to know them, how they've influenced our culture, how we influence them, and on with those. But in general, living in Seattle, the conservation issue is urbanization and how that's changing habitat for birds. And when I moved in out here in the exurbs 23 years ago now, there were new subdivisions being built all around. So I got my students and myself immediately started looking at those, and we had a big program in urban ecology, and that allowed us to focus on how songbirds in general respond to urbanization, and then some particular species like the pileated woodpecker.
Great. Yeah, and I think you know a lot about crows and have written about crows. I probably, due to your work, I think crows' occurrence or proliferation in pop culture, I think, is probably due to you. I see them a lot more on T-shirts and stickers, and
tattoos.
Yeah. Have you noticed that? I don't know if I'm right or wrong. But.
I don't know. I mean, they've been powerful, motivating our culture for millennia.
Yeah.
And I think it's just the latest thing, and especially kind of the Portland, Seattle corridor. There's a lot of interest because there's a lot of crows around, and we have shown some interesting things they do, and that sparks some people's imagination.
Right. Yeah, they're very like social animals. They have their own culture, right?
Yeah.
So you published a paper recently, co-authored with Jorge Tomasevic, called "Roosting, Reproduction, and Survivorship of Pileated Woodpeckers in a Suburban Setting." Is this a standalone investigation or part of a longer-term study?
Well, that paper in particular was part of Jorge's dissertation, and we've published 4 papers on pileated woodpeckers from his work. That was also part of this larger urban ecology project. In general, trying to understand how songbirds and other birds respond to the habitat change, the presence of humans, the presence of our associates like cats in the suburban setting around here. And that was a long-term 12-year project with lots of grad students. And Jorge focused on pileated woodpeckers, others focused on raptors or songbird movement or songbird reproduction.
Okay. And Jorge, is he in Seattle right now, or
No,
is he back in Chile? Is that right?
He is a professor in Chile, working at a university there, yes.
All right. We'll give him some more shout-outs. And
Yeah.
due for, his role in the paper for sure. Some folks listening probably have some sense of what pileated woodpeckers are all about, but can you give people sort of a sense of the environment where pileated woodpeckers live? Do they require large areas? And I feel like that's been the assumption for a long time. Or how do they get along on the suburban fringe?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when we got into the study of these animals, it was kind of assumed they needed big open space and really kind of old growth forest. They live in the old growth forests of the eastern U.S. They occur across North America. They have been studied in the old growth on the Olympic Peninsula and in eastern Washington and Oregon. And they were kind of a keystone, target species, as you said earlier, for saving big old trees and extensive tracts of undisturbed forest. And indeed, they occur there, and they do find there, and they're charismatic there because of their size. And often we think about a very limited resource of being dead trees. And if you have dead trees, it's one thing, but to have big dead trees mean you had to have big live trees. And that's what pileated woodpeckers especially need. And so it was assumed the only way you had those was, old growth forest that had, lived and died many times, basically. We had done some initial work. Another student, Tina Bluitt, and I had done some initial work counting pileated woodpeckers and found that their abundance was certainly lower in the suburban areas than it was in some of the wildland areas. And so that prompted this study to see, well, if they're here, even in low density, how are they doing? How are they using this space? And we were surprised to find that they were using it very well. They were succeeding very well at living on the fringe. As you say, they were finding places to breed. They were using a lot of space, but it wasn't all forest. It wasn't all old growth by any means. It was second growth forest like you see here in my yard, and little patches scattered all around. Usually there are some decent size, maybe 100-acre wood somewhere nearby, but a lot of small patches. They were in people's yards. They're at bird feeders a lot, and they're really adapting to how we use the fringe, cutting it up, how we cut it up, how we put supplements out there. They're adapting to those. And since then, we've also learned and kind of discovered looking back in the literature, that they were doing this in the East as well. And they've become really a suburban woodpecker.
Suburban woodpecker, all right. When you say supplements, do you mean like bird feeders, like food from bird feeders that we supply?
Yeah, especially suet feeders. And a lot of people like to put out suet feeders in the wintertime because woodpeckers of all kinds go to them. But yeah, to have a pileated woodpecker hanging on your bird feeder is pretty good deal.
Great. And then the structure that they require to thrive, you started down that road. You talked about certain elements that they like. Is there a certain habitat we should preserve, or I use this term, like build or restore?
Well, I think the key thing for all cavity nesters, and pileatids in particular, are dead trees, snags, we call them. And if they're not snags in the environment, those animals are just not going to be there in any sort of abundance. They need snags for foraging. We've made several snags in my yard here by killing trees, and as soon as a tree dies, beetles start hitting the tree, and the woodpeckers are in immediately and start foraging on those beetles. So they use it for food, and they also use it, of course, for shelter and nesting sites. So they dig these big cavities, and this is an animal that's a foot tall and about as big around as a coffee can. And for that animal to find a big enough hole in a tree to crawl in and either breed or sleep at night, the tree has to be a lot bigger than that. So at least usually a couple feet in diameter, a tree that would provide a cavity big enough, safe enough, hard enough on the outside for a woodpecker that size to find a home in.
Okay, so a lot of it's just dependent upon their size. Like they've evolved to be a certain size, and I think everyone knows what they look like. But just to give, I don't know if some folks maybe listening internationally, so these birds are about a foot in size, and they're the woodpeckers with the great big, like red mohawks, essentially. There's probably a proper term I'm not using. Crest. Yeah. Right? Is there other, interesting characteristics about them?
All black on the back, kind of speckled on the front, but a pure black back. And yeah, the red crest is key, but males and females have the red crest. And often in woodpeckers, only the males got the red crest. In this case, in the Pileated, the male also has a red mustache, but the female doesn't. So they're both pretty striking looking with that red and black. And then a nice white stripe coming up their throat that sets off that red and black. Okay. One thing I was going to say in terms of kind of making habitat in the suburban area for woodpeckers, in Western Washington, at least, we're very lucky in that we've got a few fast-growing trees. Doug fir and the other conifers are fairly slow compared to an alder, cottonwood, or even a maple. And those species, those hardwoods, grow fast and they can die pretty quick, especially alder. And we think of alder as oftentimes a trash tree, and it's an invader in a disturbed area. It nitrifies its bacteria that are associated with nitrify the soil, but it also provides a fast cavity of large size for woodpeckers. So to really start valuing alder in your restoration projects would be something to kind of wrap your head around. For these birds, it works well.
Okay, good. Shout out for alder. It can be very valuable, actually, now for building. So I think it's can be higher value than some of the other trees sometimes now. It's been demonized, I think, to a certain extent. Yeah, alder and big leaf maple, especially where in areas like urban areas in Seattle that have been cut over, starting in the mid 1800s. And really never replanted ever because of the way the metropolis developed. And so, so we have a lot of it. Yeah, sometimes in the Seattle proper, it makes up like 30% of all the trees in the natural areas anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it. So
we were surprised. We were surprised even to see some of the woodpeckers roosting not in a cavity, but just in the deep furrows of the bark of big leaf maple.
Okay.
It's really weird. Never expected that.
Yeah, so alders grow straight, kind of generally with the main stem. So that's interesting. But I guess they fall apart quick, I guess is what you're saying. And then big leaf maple is kind of a multi-stem tree, and so it has these deep kind of crevices that can rot. Yeah, and those trees, number 1 and 2, that fail most frequently in Seattle too, that like our tree crews respond to. So just failing like a limb or just whole trees.
I would call that creating habitat.
Yeah, so it's a technical term. Fail. So can you differentiate between nesting and roosting sites, and how different tree species or sizes of trees may be used?
Well, I think the only difference there is that we did see these birds roosting out in the open sometimes in these cracks and crevices and furrows. When it comes to a cavity that they use for roosting or breeding, they're basically the same. They're different cavities, but they're the same size. They require the same kind of size of a tree to support that sort of cavity. We have one in the back that is in a really small diameter tree. And I think it would probably be more likely to be a roost than a nest, because a roost you may only use occasionally. They don't always use the same place to sleep every night. They move around between different cavities. And so they're maybe not as vulnerable as a nest, where the birds are there straight on for a month with eggs and chicks.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And those would be vulnerable to predators. Okay. And so you'd want to make sure those were structurally as sound as you could get.
Okay. So the nests are where they're reproducing and where they have eggs.
Yes.
Now roosting is just they're hanging out.
Sleeping the night.
Okay, just sheltering in place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe they would stay in there on some bad storms.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's a nighttime roost.
And could roosts, and there could be, and from my little bit of research I was doing, there could be like dozens of roost sites.
There can be. I think the most we ever found in one of our territories was 5.
It's good to know. So they have options.
Yeah.
That's great. And what preys on pileated woodpeckers? I saw a mention of Cooper's hawks in the paper. Is there other things?
Well, any large raptor could. They are pretty immune to most things because at night they're inside of a tree hole, and so owls can't really get them. Mm-hmm. Maybe as they're going in or coming out of a roost hole, an owl might grab them, and the great horned owl is a predator on just about everything else in the forest. But I think pileatids are pretty immune to that. And then, Cooper's hawks, goshawks, where those occur in the more old-growth forest, they would definitely be a major predator on them. Because they are kind of slow, noisy flyers, and if a hawk keys in on them, they could catch them. But a pileated is about the same size as a Cooper's hawk, so only a big female could probably take one, and even then it would be pretty rare.
Okay. Cooper's hawks are kind of celebrated, just hunters, right? They're pretty... have a lot of, I don't know what you call it, dexterity or mobility.
Yes,
in the
incredible.
Air. Yeah.
And super abundant in suburban settings now.
Right.
And Seattle, right downtown.
Yeah, I mean, they're celebrated. We have we get reports every year. They're pretty. Yeah. Their numbers, I feel like, are on the rise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And how vulnerable do you think pileated woodpeckers are to climate change? Is it sensitive to change in general, or does it depend on where the population's habitat is located?
The biggest susceptibility is going to be habitat location, and that's going to be where there's a lot of extensive forest fires. So with the increased frequency of fires because of climate change, that's going to be a plus and a minus for a pileated woodpecker. As long as there are patches that are unburned, which is almost always the case, right, in a natural fire, then pileateds are going to love it because you're just making more big dead trees for them to eventually use, more insects coming in and using those dead trees. So most woodpeckers respond positively to burns. There are some that specialize on burns, like the black-backed. But pileateds would certainly not be entirely reduced by a large burning area unless it was extensive wall-to-wall burn, in which case then there's not a lot of habitat left once the initial flush of bugs is taken, and nesting for a few years might occur. But otherwise, I'd say they're pretty robust. I mean, they're a big animal. They can fly. They can move over large areas. They're permanent residents, so they're not having to migrate and keep track of resources matching up in different ends of the earth. So they can track the changes as they occur. They can breed earlier when the insects come out earlier. They can breed later or not breed if it's a bad year. They're long-lived, and they're carpenters, so they can kind of make their own deal. I think they're going to be one of the least susceptible.
Okay, that's good to know. Those are good points. So there's no mismatch because they're residents that are always pretty much in the same place, and so there's no kind of mismatch with the fruiting, or the flowering and the fruiting, and the availability of foods. What about and then urban heat? Do you think?
Well, I think the bigger issue with the urban is just the loss of forest cover, and the loss of dead trees, the intolerance of dead trees in the urban setting for safety reasons. So the more we can do to figure out how to provide enough of a buffer around dead trees in the urban area or reinforce them, then that's what's really going to get the woodpeckers. It's not so much the heat from the heat island. I mean, I don't see that as an issue.
As far as patch size and distance from either homes or roads, like where would you find them, like these roosting and the nesting sites?
So the roosting and nesting sites, I think they've got to be in a fairly decent sized patch, 20 acres or so probably. But if you've got thick forest and you've got big dead trees in it, they might use that even an acre or less. I mean, this is just an acre of Doug fir behind us, and they certainly are in here foraging all the time. And they will eventually nest and roost in here.
Okay.
It's a matter of time to have the trees be in the right condition for them. But we had some that were nesting and roosting in people's backyards in dead trees, that were roosting in even live trees in their yards.
Okay.
So the overall landscape here is probably somewhere in the order of 70% forest. But it's incredibly broken up with houses every 5 to 2 acres, and some even denser subdivisions with green belts in between them. They use all of those environments. The advantage of a bird relative to a mammal or a reptile is that they can just fly over the road, and they go from patch to patch like it's nothing. Especially to a big animal like a woodpecker. I mean, the guy that was here yesterday in my yard today could be 5 miles away. And it's a blink of the eye to that bird. Doesn't matter.
Okay. So this place might be 70% forested, but like perhaps in another city, a lot of cities have canopy cover goals that are just like around 30%.
Yeah.
So sometimes like distance between patches could be considerable, right?
Yeah.
So
30% is a real threshold in terms of connectivity and in terms of physical connectivity. You get below 30% and it's awfully hard to connect the patches that remain. Above that, it's pretty easy to. This doesn't have to be physical connectivity. It's functional connectivity, right? So as long as a bird can see and fly over to that next patch, there can be a house in between. There can be an interstate in between, and the birds can go over those. Other animals, not so much, but birds, especially big ones, can do that.
Right.
And these guys have that ability. Yeah. So, 30% is going to be tough, but if you had 30% forest and some big dead trees, you'd have pileated woodpeckers in there.
So you mentioned thinning in the preface of your book, Suburbia. How could we design thinning projects to help birds be successful alongside our human communities? So thinning trees potentially promotes growth on the live trees and develops snags and recruits wood to the forest floor. Is there any, and really sometimes thinning is sort of frowned upon as well. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk about some of the nuances involved with thinning.
Yeah, I mean, I would use this acre behind us as an example. When I moved into here 23 years ago, the trees were really, really tight. They are still tight. You could cut half of these trees. There's like 200 trees in this acre. And these trees are Doug firs for the most part that are 70 to 80 years old. They're 150 or more feet tall. And they were thin pencils when I first got here. And we cut out a lot of them and dropped them down. But oftentimes, instead of thinning all the way to the ground, which is what you would typically do in forestry, right? I just cut them halfway or take the top third off, take all the foliage off, drop it to the ground for structure there for things like Pacific wrens and salamanders, and leave the bole standing as a standing dead tree. You've taken away the shade that canopy created, so you're opening up and letting other trees get larger and more variable. You're opening up patches like we did for that big leaf maple back there, so it can spread out and provide that habitat. But you're still leaving some of the standing dead tree boles for woodpeckers and other cavity nesters. So that's a strategy that, a forester wouldn't really ever mention, but it's a good one. You don't need to take every tree down to the bottom if you're thinning. You can leave some of the boles standing 50, 60 feet and provide some really unique and good habitat.
Yeah. Those are good strategies. And I think many small private forest landowners are probably thinking that way because they enjoy the value that comes off the timber, but also the habitat that they're able to create as well.
Yeah, and you can take down, when it's really stocked thick, you can take out a lot of the trees, and ours here in the Western Washington grow so fast that you will get a big flush of the understory, huckleberry and salmonberry, which are critical for birds, and that replaces any of the lost, canopy structure you might have had pretty quickly in terms of diversity.
Yeah. So did you do like an overall thinning, or did you do like a kind of a clumpy, gappy, or just you sort of freestyled it?
Well,
just kind of based on what you thought.
We kind of marked it out. I mean, it was more. I would say it was more freestyle, but there were some, like you will see. We have a couple of really large snags that we made, large diameter, mainly for pileated woodpeckers, and so those wouldn't have been trees you would have thinned if you were just trying to take the smallest trees out or clump it in certain areas. We did some clump thinning to open up especially for big leaf maple rather than just for structural diversity, but we already had to start at it with the maple, so we'd open up around that. And otherwise, there were some real thick clumps that we took out, more trees in than just uniform throughout.
Great, yeah, and I see lots of diversity, so not only, some people would... sort of demonizing the alder and the big leaf maple, or remove all those and just keep the conifers in a traditional industrial forest complex. But you have like big leaf maple. I see Doug fir. I see some western hemlock creeping in there. I'm sure there's some cedar. I see cedar there.
Quite a few cedar.
I see like all the I see all the trees, all the main trees
Yep.
are here.
And they pretty much were. This open area, another about half acre of our property was clear cut when we bought it. And I restored that with all native shrubs, basically, and really tried to focus on shrubs there for some of the birds that require that as opposed to the forest setting.
Could you summarize the principles of what you describe as nature's 10 commandments? I think you alluded to some of these as kind of a very similar to like the land ethic or Leopold-esque sort of principles that you put forward in Suburbia.
Yeah. So, in Welcome to Suburbia, what I tried to kind of summarize some of the stuff we have learned from other studies as well as our own. Basically, if you want birds on your property or in your town or whatever unit you have control over, if you're a planner, think about the whole city. Diversity of habitats is really important. That's why we have kind of surprisingly high diversity here in the suburbs and exurbs around Seattle, because you get a lot of different habitats close together. So at a large scale, maintaining diversity of habitat. You don't have to have all forest. You don't have to have all lawn. A mixture is beneficial. But if there's one thing that I've tried to do, and I think in our suburban setting especially, would be to reduce the amount of lawn cover. Small patches, you'll see I've got some small patches because they're nice for us to sit in and enjoy. Mm-hmm. But, these extensive 1-2 acre golf courses, basically, they provide habitat for very little, if any, native species. So minimizing lawn, replacing that with native shrubs or even non-native shrubs that are providing nectar. We've got lots of flowers this time of year. Or if you have a little bit of lawn, not mowing it. It's technically called a freedom lawn. And, I've just started mowing my patches over here. In the last, just a couple of days ago, because the bloom has basically died down. But when I quit mowing my grass, I ended up getting a whole lot of ajuga, which was there. I didn't know it. I mean, it's not native, but it has these purple spikes of flowers, and the bees and other pollinators go crazy in there. I had 3 species of bumblebees last weekend, I counted. There's probably a lot more than that, but that's what I could recognize. So just letting it go bushy and wild, and then mow it down, after that's done, and you're providing habitat for a bunch of things. As far as birds in particular, 3 things other than the habitat. I mean, that's key. But providing food and water is good for birds. You have to do it responsibly. And you can go online and find out how to feed responsibly, keeping your food dry and not having so much that rats are in there all the time, and providing good quality food. So feeding and having water available. As we've been talking, the birds have been going in and out of the little pond behind you like nobody's business. Even here in our wet, Seattle environment, standing or running water is really attractive. If you've got a cat, keep it inside, or if it's outside, keep it on a leash. If you've got an outside cat that you can't convert to inside, when the next cat comes, make sure it stays inside. Cats are the number 1 killer of birds worldwide. And they're not as big of an issue in Seattle as other places because we have coyotes. And valuing coyotes and other predators is another thing that can be hard to do when they kill your pet. But it's essential for that service in the environment, keeping things more in balance, not letting cats get way out in the forest because coyotes eat them as soon as they get out there. And then the second biggest source of mortality are windows that are unprotected. So there's stickers on these windows here, and birds see that. They're ultraviolet. And so I just, wherever I had a lot of collisions before, put these ultraviolet stickers, or you can get paints, or you can get strings to hang there, or even mesh. If it's screen, it's already protected. But you could stretch the mesh that you put over your blueberries and things like that, tight over the window on the outside. You don't see it looking out, and the birds do. And so they'll avoid it, because collisions with windows in suburban settings kills about 500 million birds a year. Wow. In the U.S.
Yeah, I didn't know. Well, I've heard about collisions, but not that number. Wow.
It's
and
a
so
big
you have
deal.
these decals I'm looking at. They're sort of leaf shapes, and they're reflective. Ultraviolet?
Ultraviolet is what they reflect in. So when you look at them, they look kind of fuzzy. From the inside, it's not a big deal. Looking out, you get used to them very quickly. And you can get all different kind of shapes, but the nice thing is most birds see in the ultraviolet spectrum and we don't. So they look much more solid to a bird than to us. So they don't obscure our view, and yet they give warning to the bird that you can't fly through here. But you do have to have them pretty close together, and some people, oppose that. But, when you pick up 5 or 6 dead birds under your window every year, you realize if there's a million houses that are doing that in our area, it adds up pretty quick.
Okay.
So those would be the key things, thinking about connectivity and riparian areas in particular, as we were talking about. That's also kind of a bigger landscape level consideration for planners, for the county or city to have in their guides. It'd be good. But really, having native habitat out there, having it as close together as you can get it, big patches where you have it, but have a variety. Have big patches, have small patches, have linear strips, have the waterways protected. All of that adds up, to a diverse and functional environment.
Okay. And we often do talk about yards, and not everyone has yards, right?
Yeah.
So I think what I've heard really recently is even the value of the planter boxes, or like you said, the strips, or just these very small places adds up.
There's 2 juncos nesting under the eaves of our front house. And a woman last week or week before had a junco at I think she was on the 13th floor of an apartment complex in Seattle in her planter box. So all those things are useful for some birds. Some birds can handle that, and I think it's important to enhance the birds that can handle living with us. It doesn't provide for spotted owls and things like that. We need big reserves far away from people for those species. But for those that can live with us, the more we provide for them, the more abundant they can be, and the more they can therefore adapt to the things we throw at them. Climate change, fire frequency, whatever it might be. If you have a small population and things change, you're out of luck. If a big population, natural selection can work on it and fit you to that new challenge.
There's a couple questions I ask everyone, and we've been talking about trees almost this entire time, but I would like to know, do you have a favorite tree?
Ponderosa pine's always been one of my favorites, but, it's more of a Arizona and Rocky Mountain zone for me. But I think of the Northwest here, it's either big leaf maple or western red cedar. Cedar is awfully special tree, but
definitely a sacred tree.
Yeah,
but
but the big leaf maples are so cool. And for me, because of the diversity of animals that they provide for, it's right up there.
Actually, I think even more than red alder, big leaf maples we've demonized to a certain extent, just because we have so much of them. And actually they're, I don't know, I think some people actually tend to write them off too, because there's sort of a decline that's been spotted, people have been tracking the last couple years, and I think overall it may be related to just exposure to drought.
Edges,
edges.
Out.
So, but they do provide for more than just pileated woodpeckers.
Yeah, they certainly, the seeds they provide are eaten by a variety of species. Just the structural complexity of them, looking at it, the cavities that form naturally in them, they do break branches easily and often. And so those cavities that form are going to be used by chickadees, nuthatches, brown creepers. The seeds are eaten by jays, sparrows, all kinds of, any of the seed eaters are going to get those on the ground or from the tree themselves. I wouldn't say it's any more or less than, the firs and things, but it adds variety. It adds some air, an open space that some of the animals need. It provides a great perch for a raptor to sit on and hunt from in the winter, especially when the leaves are down. So to me, just the variety they provide in the forest, and the leaf fall itself providing great habitat for all of our amphibians. All the salamanders in the forest that come into the forest for winter and go to the ponds to breed, they need that duff layer, and that the conifer layer, it supports some, but that's kind of a caustic environment relative to nice decaying deciduous leaves, and especially those big ones.
Add some diversity. I did not expect you to say big leaf maple. That's a good one. Good one.
Yeah.
That's the first. All right. Another reason for the podcast, I think if folks are listening, are people that are potentially interested in restoration as a hobby or see it as a career. So do you have any advice for people who want to study or get involved with either avian or restoration ecology?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about living here, I mean, I moved from Boise, just outside of Boise, to here when I came to Western Washington. And in Boise, you had to work so hard to get plants established. I mean, it was like water constantly and fight cheatgrass. In Western Washington, if you put it in the ground, it's going to grow, almost certainly. And so it's a great place to try restoring an area. I mean, I didn't know really anything about it when I came here, but with the county extension native plant sales, we got a ton of native shrubs, put those in, mixed it up on our hillside here, and things have taken off great. I've now got Swainson's thrush nesting there. So if you have a bit of space, doing that is, I think, easy here in Western Washington relative to a lot of places to get plants established. Then it's a matter of hacking them back and making sure that, if you don't take over everything, which like some of the roses I've planted, boy, do they take over.
They go bonkers.
Yeah. So I would say one of the most important things for a restoration ecologist is a good machete.
Yeah, not being afraid to cut them back.
Got to cut them back
at the right time.
It is hard to. I agree. I was, especially coming from a dry environment, we were fearful of cutting things back. Not anymore.
Yeah, we're getting to the point in some cases where the projects have developed so much that the shrubs are overtopping some of the trees we planted. Wow. So it's so no one ever knows, or no one has enough foresight sometimes to think that things are going to get crowded. So
yeah, well, you'll see that with our Alaska yellow cedar over there. It's gotten above the salmonberry, but barely.
Yeah, so it's free to grow.
Yeah,
almost at this point in time. Well, good times. Well, thanks. I think we answered all the questions.
Yeah. Well, we should walk around a little bit.
Want to walk around? I'd love to walk around.
See what you can see.
It's the best part. And this is we call this free range podcasting.
Okay.
That's what we're doing. Okay. Yeah, you're fortunate to be able to cut that high. Because really, so the Pileates, they nest at a certain height, right? So, I mean, you need like a 6-foot snag or something isn't going to cut it, right?
Yeah,
so
you want something that's taller for sure.
Okay.
And, well, they'll nest fairly low, but they are most attracted to a tall dead tree.
Yeah.
And you can see how we made the tops of those look more like a lightning strike, not just flat.
Yeah, right.
And that's also more attractive to woodpeckers.
And I feel like there's some trainings for arborists to be able to do that sort of like messy cuts. Yeah. When and some people are trained in it for sure.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I think sometimes we can inject trees or use herbicide, but it's kind of a who knows how it's going to crack or who knows how it's going to shake out over time.
And the key thing is to inoculate them with heart rot fungus.
Okay.
Because with heart rot, the interior becomes decayed, but the outer shell's hard. Okay. So for a woodpecker, it's got a nice hard case and a soft interior.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
And so inoculate it with and that is that commercially available species?
There are commercially available. They have little dowels that are impregnated with the mycelium.
That's right. I wonder. There's a place, Fungi Perfecti. Ever heard of that organism? It's like down in Olympia.
That would make sense.
It's a good catalog. It's a very interesting catalog to read through. Yeah, that's where I've seen those things. Okay.
Shiitake brick growing there. But the heart rot stuff is, that's the key. And I didn't do that here. And that may be why we haven't gotten pileated even at a couple of our big snags. So if you look, if you stand back here, you see the broken top. If you look through above the red. Yeah. So that's a snag we made. That's a big one.
Great.
And that there are pileated foraging all over that, but they haven't nested yet, and it may be because the interior is not the right composition yet. It's not decayed enough.
Right. Okay. And we did talk about removal. Like a lot of folks like to remove snags because they're fearful of where they're gonna fall. So, but you feel like these are far enough away.
Well,
far enough away. I guess you love birds. Maybe that overcomes like your fear of them falling on your place.
Those two trees, we didn't want to make a full snag there because of that.
Oh, okay.
But I also, before I cut them, they were as tall as these other trees.
Oh, yeah, right? Those are. So, you cut another 100 feet off them or something?
And I tell you, man, those things move in the wind.
Yeah.
It was never a problem, but we got a bit concerned. And so we're like, well, okay, let's snag the tops of those and see what will happen with the rest of the tree. Will it stay alive?
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing with snags is they typically, a lot of these fall from the top down. So I'll show you, though, in the front here, one we did cut off after I'd already snagged it.
Yeah.
He was in that tree yesterday when I was talking to you. So this snag right here, it was twice that tall. It would have, when it fell, if it was going to fall, it would clip the edge of the house, we figured.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, we should cut it. And the reason is because of what the Pileated did. It's through quite a ways with these ants. So this is all Pileated foraging, these long holes like this, and they get into the ant colony that's in there, carpenter ants, and they're digging in there, and they're getting the larvae and the adult ants. So this guy was working this so much and in so many places. I thought, geez, if it falls from there, this is low, like a couple feet off the ground, then it would have clipped that corner of our house.
Yeah, I mean, he's like half the, say him, but he's like half the way through it.
He's half through, I agree.
Almost, yeah, for sure. And so there's different, I was reading or listening to some things talking about the different size cavity or holes, right? So there's these roundish holes and then these longer, well, I don't know if those are two round holes that just got connected.
Well, they connect them, but they always start with these round holes like this to start going in. Maybe they're just testing to see if there are ants in there. I mean, I think they can hear them and sense them otherwise. But as they start working, you can see the gallery in there, all the insect work inside there. Once they get into that, they just follow the vein. It's like mining a ore, and they just go with it.
Yeah,
and it's easier to keep going in the same place than to start somewhere else.
Right, and they have that adaptation, right? Those specialized tongues that are like super long and barbed, right?
Yeah. The tongue goes through the one of their nasal cavities and wraps around behind the head.
That's right.
So it can stretch way out.
Yeah.
It's a pretty cool.
Yeah, we've seen some skulls.
Yeah. All woodpeckers have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can just walk around and look at some of the other snags. But I mean, we have some short snags in the back, and woodpeckers still use those. I mean, these snags here we made, there's all the Pileated foraging on that one, and that snag's only, 15 feet. 20 feet maybe. Definitely not going to hit anything. So yeah, leaving down material, like you were saying, let it rot. All kinds of habitat there for salamanders as well as woodpeckers.
You got this great big brush pile or
huge brush pile.
Huge brush pile, like way chest height. Yeah, it's good. It's good design. I like that.
Yeah, so in the COVIDian time, it's nice having this little space to walk around in.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I think being outside is probably good for your mental health, well-being, and you got clean air. So
this is that snag I really had Pileateds in mind when we made this one, and indeed, I mean, they foraged all that work you see on the side there, knocking the bark off. That's all from Pileated. But hairy woodpecker has been nesting in the top of this one.
Yeah.
I might change my favorite tree.
Oh yeah,
I forgot.
That's okay.
Cascara.
Oh, cascara.
I bet nobody's had cascara yet.
No one talks about cascara.
I'll put cascara in with the big leaf.
Okay,
but
a good one.
It's good because the berries it produces. Pileateds will eat those berries and just kind of chuck them back one at a time.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so carpenter ants and then
cascara berries. And also they eat a lot of
and it's pretty big berries, so you got to have a big mouth, right, to take it down, right? Okay.
Well, they're
kind
not
of big-ish.
that big. Not as big as the salmonberry.
Yeah, and that occupies like the middle story, the forest. That's cool. And
we have some pretty good sized ones around. But they're really a neat tree. And boy, talk about solid wood. Wow.
Yeah. for sure. Yeah, it's beautiful wood.
Native
Some honeysuckle. Whoa.
That's been coming in good. I've spent a lot of time back here pulling ivy.
Yeah, with cascaras, we've been. I usually add it almost to every plant palette. I don't know why. Yeah,
Okay, great.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
There was one year we went overboard, probably a couple years ago, but vine maple too.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we're gonna pay the price. Probably some archaeologist later on will be like, well, I don't know, or somebody will be like investigating our forest restorations in the future. Then be like, what were these guys thinking? There's
Yeah.
just so much vine maple.
Vine maple.
And cascara.
God, it's great, but man, it can get thick in a hurry.
Yeah.
I think I planted that one maybe
Okay.
about 15 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, because you cruise around through some of these big old forests and get thick.
Oh yeah.
Especially hunter. I think like people who are into like hunting and really off trail work. I think they really kind of detest it. But
I know when I first started planting shrubs in the front here, I put in salmonberry, and one of the guys working for me on the peninsula, he goes, "Why would you ever plant that stuff?"
Yeah.
But it's great. I mean,
Especially
it's
if
great
you-
habitat.
Especially you've been lost in it for a couple hours, probably.
Yeah, I
You're
have
like-
been too. Yeah.
You have these nightmares.
It is not fun. But yeah, I mean, this is a way to think about, cutting off the top of trees to thin rather than taking them all the way down. The effect is the same up above. The canopy's not complete, but still have a lot of structure if you don't start with any.
Yeah.
There are some good examples on that big leaf maple of those furrowed
Yeah.
areas that are, gosh, it must be a couple inches in there, and a pileated could just lay back in that crack
Oh, really?
and
Okay.
roost there.
It's good to know.
Yeah. If it's good weather.
Yeah, from some arborist perspective, yeah, that's something that's like bound to fail pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's like,
For me, it's beautiful. It really won't do much, but actually something like this, if it was higher up and sprouted, it'd be a great robin nest site.
okay.
Still could be a wren, under there with the stuff around it. It's kind of nice protected area for a Pacific wren. And they're one of the species that you don't need a lot of space, but they are a species that drops out of suburbs when the native understory goes. So
Okay.
if you've got salal, some sword fern, and some brush piles, even on a 1 acre spot like this, I have 2 pairs of Pacific wrens that'll
nice.
breed here. And
Cool.
it just doesn't take a lot of space, but it has to be the right mix.
Okay.
But there's a good example of an alder. It's a
Yeah.
pretty good size alder that we cut off and made that snag, and that's a hairy woodpecker, not
Nice.
used right now, but it was bred in there. Flickers have been in there. That's the Swenson thrush giving that whipping call.
Oh, yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. Gotta memorize these.
And they'll breed in this. Again, they don't need a lot of space, but they need salmonberry. If you've got a thicket of salmonberry, they're gonna definitely be in there. If only foraging, but probably nesting too.
All right. Are they bothered by us? Do they know we're here yet?
I'm sure they know we're here, but no, they shouldn't be too bothered. I mean, if there was an active nest close by on the edge, I wouldn't go by it now. They have just started singing the last week. Pretty typical. They're late. They time their breeding with the salmonberry. So they're just really getting going.
That was good eating. I just had one.
Yeah. Native crab apples. Ooh, what do we got there? Ooh. Nice. That's Pacific slope flycatcher. You see it right there?
Yep. Pretty
So,
small.
Yeah,
And the,
but that's another, Pacific slope flycatcher, Swainson's thrush, and Pacific wren. Those are the 3 birds that we had that maintain a bit in suburban areas but decline with loss of forest.
Right.
And they're much more, they're the most common birds in our, our forests of the area.
On the slopes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
So it's a good sign. If you
that
get those
first-
in your yard, I think you're doing the right thing.
Is that the first time you've seen it here? or
No,
Okay.
they've been singing all around, but that's the best look I've had at one. I
Nice.
don't know if he's got a nest right in here somewhere, possibly.
They nest kind of high up in the
No,
shrub layer.
they'll nest in little adventitious branches off of alder. Is one of their favorite things, where they grow up like this. They'll put a moss cup right down in that little spread of branches. Like we've been fighting this snowberry that we put in one tiny snowberry plant there 23 years ago, and it's like, oh man.
Snowberry's a winner, I think. It's in areas where, in tough spots, it does really well.
Yeah. But the birds don't use it much.
Oh, really?
I mean, the berries, they don't, it's kind of the last thing that they might eat.
Yeah, they hang out. They hang on forever, right?
Yeah, they do.
Through winter time.
Yeah, so I'm sure there are times when it's like, okay, we'll take it. But
yeah. Thimbleberry, another one. Thimbleberry I use a lot.
I love that stuff.
Because I think it's another rubus. So I feel like we remove a rubus, so we replace with a rubus.
Yep.
That's another one. It's like notoriously in a lot of my plant palettes.
Yeah, it'd be great. It's a great one.
It's like cascara and a lot of thimbleberry.
Do you ever plant salmonberry?
Not really, because generally it's there,
yeah.
And we just know it will do well. If I can't remember the last time I specified it.
So song sparrow is easy. They're everywhere. That's its song. By getting the thrush, the Pacific wren, and the Pacific soap flycatcher, that's
a big win, huh?
That's
winners. Great.
Yeah.
That's cool. We got a good spot here. Thanks for the lap around.
Yeah, you bet.
It was perfect. Thanks for your time.
Yep.
It's lovely. Thank you so much for finding Tree Hugger Podcast again. In your app show description and the all-new treehuggerpod.com, I will link to John's books and articles and a few other things. John is on Twitter at Suburdia. He appears to be in Yellowstone right now, so there's some awesome photos and content he's putting out right now. I can't wait to hear about it when he returns. On the Tree Hugger website, there's a page dedicated to each episode. Please go check it out to listen, download the episode, read about the guest, and catch some of the bonus material. And let me know what you think. Thanks to the Seattle-based Dumb Thumbs for providing the theme song. You can find all of their tunes at dumbthumbs.bandcamp.com. I'm Michael Yadrick, and this has been another episode of Tree Hugger Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the show so we show up in your feed. It would be cool if you can drop a review of the show. It will help other people find it. Then, of course, you can all keep up to date with the show at the new website, treehuggerpod.com, and all the socials at treehuggerpod. Feel free to email me comments, questions, and ideas. Thanks for listening. See you in the woods, under the cavities of woodpecker trees.